Thank you, and hello. Can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me. Okay. So, my name is Patricia Nilsson, and I'm here to tell you that one of the things I'm most proud about is how I managed to get my newspaper, the Financial Times, to start treating the porn industry like a business that deserves to be taken seriously. Just double checking, can you really hear me? Because it sounds a bit weird for me. Does that mean yes or no? Should I just wait then, or? If I try now, does it work?
We could change. Would you like to take this one?
I'm looking at you. Should I do that, or?
It's actually quite perfect. Yeah, we try it again like this. Too close. Yes.
Okay. Is it working now? Can you hear me?
Speak a little louder, please.
And I will speak a little louder. Okay, good. So, to go back where we were, so my name is Patricia Nilsson, and I'm proud because I got the Financial Times to start treating the porn industry as a business that deserves to be taken seriously. And that wasn't easy because, of course, we don't really like to talk about pornography, fearing what our familiarity with the subject might imply. Because sexual pleasure and fantasy, even though it's such a big part of the human experience, still is seen as something shameful. And the porn industry, even though it has very successfully managed to commercialize our sexual desire, is often talked about as little more than a joke. And I think that one of the main reasons for our reluctance to talk about pornography is that, of course, in our sanitized and civilized society, it often becomes, or very quickly can become, awkward to recognize just how strong of a primal urge that sexual desire is, and how big of an influence it has on how we actually behave. But I also believe that one of the main reasons why we don't really like to think about our own relationship with pornography is that we don't want to acknowledge and admit that when we watch it, we are enjoying sex work. We are communally pooling resources to pay women and men to use their bodies to satisfy our sexual desires. But the reality is that most of us, no matter what our view is on sex work and prostitution, have at some point watched pornography. Many people do so regularly, and it is increasingly becoming the way that children, teenagers, and adults learn about their own and other people's bodies and sexualities. And just to try and convince you that I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying these things, try imagining the enormous amounts of data flows that make up the digital world. So every YouTube video that's ever been streamed, every Zoom meeting attended, every shopping item that's been added to a checkout basket. At any given time, roughly a tenth of global internet traffic is made up of people watching pornography. Every day, more pornography is uploaded to the internet than the data equivalent of Netflix's entire library of films and TV series. It is true that more men than women watch pornography, but that gap is closing. And just for anyone who would sort of say that, oh, pornography is mainly a male cultural phenomenon, most big porn sites claim to have a larger proportion of female viewers than the Financial Times has female readers. So, in short, people around the world have never been watching or making as much porn as they do today. And the driving force behind this significant social change, which I don't think we fully understand yet, is the rise of the so-called tube sites. And I'm sure you've heard of them. Pornhub, YouPorn, Xvideos, Germany's own favorite, Xhamster. These are sites that have made it possible for pretty much anyone to watch porn at any time, from anywhere, immediately, and for free. And these sites, they rely on the same business model as other social media platforms. So the content that people come to watch is made and uploaded by other users, and the companies behind these sites make money by collecting vast amounts of sexual data from the people around the world who are visiting these sites. So, who exactly is it that is profiting from these unique and vast databases of human sexuality? That is a question that's turning out to be very difficult to answer. And the point of the stories that I'll tell you today is that I think it's absolutely mad that we don't care more about this. Because long gone are the days of silk robe pornographers like Hugh Hefner and Larry Flint. You know, you can say what you want about these men, but at least they were public figures. They defended their industry, they defended the people working in their industry, and they could be held accountable. And if there was a golden era for porn, it was this time when pornographers controlled the distribution of their videos. So cinemas, VHS, then DVDs, magazines, of course, hotel, pay-per-view rentals. There was a lot of money to be made in the porn industry in these days. I mean, porn studios even had contract stars, meaning they would pay porn stars to just not work for other studios. And this all changed with the internet, and more specifically, it all changed with piracy. And piracy, of course, was an issue for all creative industries, but while Hollywood and the music industry had enough money, but also social clout to push back against file-sharing sites such as, for example, Napster, the porn industry ended up becoming swallowed by its pirates. So even though there's much more money being made in porn today, it's going into fewer pockets, mainly the tube sites, which are relying on pornography that is often stolen. And these companies are not only the most powerful in the porn industry, these companies are amongst the world's largest internet companies in terms of how many people they reach and can collect data on. And yet, we barely know anything about them. And I learned this a few years back when I decided to try and learn more about the biggest porn conglomerate of them all, a company that was until recently called MindGeek and has now changed its name to ALO. And the man who built this company, who shaped it, who helped cement the tube site business model as the future of pornography, he's German. And when this guy, Fabian Tillman, was a teenager in the late 90s, he was one of the first people to build a piece of software that would allow website owners to charge for advertising slots by tracking what people actually clicked on. So he was probably one of the first people to understand just how much money could be made in online marketing and affiliate marketing, just if you had something that would attract enormous amounts of people, such as, for example, free videos of people having sex. And in sort of porn history, Fabian is often remembered as the techie who sort of ushered in a new era of pornography, but it's not the technical aspect that he brought in. It was actually something much different, because this guy never founded a single tube site. He never built one. He bought them. He bought most tube sites and most of the porn industry. Essentially, what he did is what in the world of finance is called a roll-up. So in this context, it meant the consolidation of the many, many small porn studios and porn sites, many of which at that time were losing money because their porn videos were being stolen and uploaded to the tube sites, many of which that Fabian already owned. The question, of course, is, how did a German coder, who has himself admitted that he never set foot on a porn shoot, how did he end up becoming so powerful that he could basically take over most of the porn industry? I mean, essentially, where did he get all his money from? By 2011, Fabian's global porn empire was growing so quickly, there were a lot of people in the porn industry who started speculating that the money was coming straight from the mafia. But the actual truth is way more incredible, because the money that essentially turned Fabian into the king of pornland had come straight from Wall Street. What Fabian managed to do was that he convinced some of the world's biggest institutional investors, such as Fortress Investment Group, JP Morgan Chase, even Cornell University, to bankroll his vision for free porn. And I don't have time to go into the details of exactly how he did that. And I would like to say, if you're interested in learning more about it, I can recommend you listen to Hot Money Season 1, which is the result of the investigation I did for the FT on this. But long story short, Fabian ended up being introduced to two former Goldman Sachs bankers who had recently set up their own investment fund. And they essentially bought Fabian's pitch that with the tube sites running the show, the porn industry would essentially be a tech business. The porn industry was essentially a data business. So it was as if the sex workers who depend on porn studios for their livelihood, it was as if they didn't even exist outside of the screen. And they told Fabian that he would be able to get the $100 million that he had asked for in order to roll up the porn industry. But there was a catch. The investors were expecting Fabian to pay an interest rate of over 20%, more than 20%. I mean, these are almost illegal rates. And yet, these investors, who would end up making a lot of money of the tube site business model, did not want to have anything to do with pornography. In fact, many of them actually ended up selling their stakes or their debt once it was leaked to the press how they had helped unleash free porn across the world. But they are important because the porn industry and porn itself, I mean how it looks, would have been very different if it wasn't for them. Because their appetite for conquest turned out to be much bigger than this guy Fabian's. So when Fabian came to them and asked for $100 million to change the porn industry, buy a bunch of porn sites, and basically build the world's biggest porn company, his investors asked, why only $100 million? I mean, surely there are other things you can buy. Why don't you write us a wish list? Which Fabian did, and he ended up walking away with $362 million. That was enough money to turn him into the undisputed king of pornland. At his height, Fabian Tillman believes he controlled about 60 to 70% of global porn traffic. Unfortunately for him, his reign didn't last that long, because in 2012 he was arrested by German authorities for suspected tax evasion. And this led to plenty of headlines, bad headlines, especially here in Germany. And of course, investors don't like bad headlines, especially not when they're trying to keep their own investment in this company a low-key secret. So behind bars, the man who had managed to convince Wall Street that the porn industry was not only big business, it was a safe business, started to look a bit like a liability. And this was an interesting moment because it really revealed who was now in control of this big porn conglomerate. Because the Wall Street investors who had lent Fabian the money, they forced him out. They threatened to make the terms on his debt impossible to comply with, forcing him to sell. So Fabian today owns a chain of Italian restaurants in Köln. He also owns the techno club Wirtschaft, but he has nothing to do with porn anymore. And the official story back in 2012 was that he sold the business to two of MindGeek's senior managers. That turned out not to be the whole truth. And this is where I become part of the story. So fast forward about 7 years, it's 2019, I'm a very junior reporter working for the Financial Times in London, where I cover the media industry. And I become interested in the UK's most recent attempt at introducing age verification for porn sites. The reason is pretty straightforward. Children shouldn't be watching hardcore pornography, and there was plenty of evidence that they were. But privacy activists were warning that there were inherent risks with creating huge databases that were linking people's IDs with their sexual fantasies. And more importantly, they were asking, if we do create these databases, who will be responsible for safeguarding them? And that is when I learned that in the lead up to the UK government introducing its age verification bill, it had been lobbied by a company that very few people at the time had ever heard about, namely a company called MindGeek. And it appeared that this company, which owned Pornhub and YouPorn, had been trying to encourage the UK government to introduce age verification for porn sites. And the obvious question then becomes, why would a company whose very business model hinges on having as many people as possible visit its sites want to lobby for a bill that would make exactly that much more difficult? And the answer is that by the time MindGeek was lobbying the UK government, it had understood just how valuable the data that a growing number of governments is now asking it to collect. So by the time it was lobbying the UK government, MindGeek had already started building its own age verification system called HID. Germany comes into the picture here again, because so far it's only been released fully in one market, and that is Germany. But British privacy watchdogs were warning that the UK government was essentially granting MindGeek enough power, or like the power to collect enough data to become the Facebook of porn. And that was the moment when I tried to learn more about this very powerful company and got quite confused because there was very little information about it. It even turned out that since 2012, which is when Fabian left, the company hadn't granted a single interview to any journalists. So where we are is here. So the porn industry depends on people to literally bear it all. But information about its biggest business and the people who own it was basically kept like a state secret. But of course, like any journalist, I do find secrets irresistible. And so I tried thinking maybe I can learn more about these guys. So I started calling around, asking about these two managers who the company had officially said that it sold the company to, which is when I had a source tell me something quite incredible. So he said something which every journalist loves to hear, which is like, I'll tell you something that no one else knows. And he told me, MindGeek has a secret owner, and his name is Bernard Bergemar. As I was sat there, this was during lockdown, so I was like in my bedroom, holding up the phone to my cheek, and I was typing it into Google, and I didn't find anything. And so I asked him to spell the name. Again, I didn't find anything. And this guy kept telling me, he was adamant, if you're after the man who is in control of the world's largest porn conglomerate, this is your guy. So I spent months trying to find any type of trace of Bernard. I asked people in the porn industry, have you ever heard his name? Have you ever heard that maybe there's someone else in the ownership structure of MindGeek? And people told me I was being lied to. I mean, some people even called me a conspiracy theorist. They said, look, MindGeek is the biggest and most important company in porn. I mean, there's no way someone has sort of come in and taken over the company without people hearing about it. But the thing is that MindGeek's financial filings in Luxembourg, which is where the company is headquartered, were showing that most of the profits were being diverted to subsidiaries that owned all the IP. And 66% of these subsidiaries were owned by an undisclosed shareholder who, since Fabian left the company, had taken out more than $100 million in dividends. And one of these subsidiaries had the letters RT in the name, which sparked the question, could this have something to do with this tube site called RedTube, which MindGeek had bought just around the time that Fabian sold the company. And I managed to find someone who'd worked at RedTube for more than 15 years ago when it was just a startup in Vienna. And I remember calling him and I asked him, what was the name of your boss at the time? And he told me, Bernard Bergemar. So I had enough information that the company actually admitted that this guy existed, that he was the majority owner of the company, but that was it. I didn't know anything else about him. So we put that in a story, we published it at the FT. It ended up being the best read story that the FT published that year. It just turns out that people love to read about porn. And a couple of days later, I got a call from a colleague on the FT's investigations desk. And she told me that a source of her had called her and told her that not only does he know Bernard, he knows Bernard's biggest secret. Bernard Bergemar is a fake name. His real name is Bernd Bergmeier, which I know is quite similar and probably makes Bernard Bergemar the worst porn name ever. But this opened the door because Bernard Bergemar had gone through great lengths to make sure that he left no trace, that there was no way you could find out anything about him. But the same was not true for Bernd Bergmeier. So suddenly we knew that he is Austrian, he is a son of farmers, his family is today one of the biggest landowners in Austria, probably thanks to the money he made through the tube sites. He studied at University of Chicago Booth Business School, and we know that he used to work at Goldman Sachs, mainly in Frankfurt. And it is this bit about Goldman Sachs that is most essential, because remember the bankers who granted Fabian Tillman the money that led him to build this huge porn conglomerate? They were also ex-Goldman Sachs, and they essentially saw this guy as one of their own. And best of all was that Bernard, or Bernd, he would not risk appearing in negative headlines like Fabian had, because Bernard basically didn't exist. And that was the truth for nearly a decade, but as soon as news of his existence got out, he did start making plans to sell the company. And so about 1 year ago, it was announced that a newly set up private equity firm called Ethical Capital Partners had bought MindGeek, which then quickly changed its name to ALO. And the thing about Ethical Capital Partners is that they claim that, that most of the criticism that the TubeSite business model faces stems to the secrecy that prevailed under the previous ownership. And they claim that all of that's going to be different now. But the thing is, when I asked them where did they get the money to buy MindGeek, who had given them the money, of course they wouldn't say. So once again, we don't know who owns the world's biggest porn conglomerate. And the craziest thing about this is like ALO, or MindGeek, is still a beacon of transparency compared to the other tube sites. The company that owns Xvideos and XNXX is owned by a group called Web Group Czech Republic, WGCZ, which is based in Prague. It's owned by a pair of French twins. That's basically all we know about it. Little information, the very little information that is out there about Hammy Media and its ownership, which is the company that owns Xhamster, has only been found in recent years due to the hard work of German journalists. But we basically still don't know who the main profiteers of free porn are. We don't know who is in control over sexual data, and we don't know who is pulling the levers on the algorithms that are controlling our sexuality. And I believe, and I hope that you agree, that this is something that we should care about. Thank you. And I think we have time for some questions, if there are any questions. This question.
Thank you for the talk. This was excellent. So the question I always have, so I've been looking at the dating industry, the same kind of scrutiny, not quite the same scrutiny, but do you always find that as soon as you talk about porn or anything like this, people just go, oh, who cares, you know? No one takes it seriously. No one takes like the outrageous things that happen in there, like seriously. Is it just a topic that people just like shy away from?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the main reasons that these companies are allowed to sort of operate in complete secrecy is that we don't dare to talk about pornography, that we don't dare to, you know, we talk about films and music and advertising, but we just don't dare to acknowledge that pornography also influences us and it's also part of the media that we consume. I find that especially frustrating in terms of all these porn, I mean the porn industry, the online porn industry, and the tube site specifically, of course, wouldn't function without the help of, you know, the credit card companies and banks and so on. And these financial institutions, we don't even know which banks act as the acquiring banks for the biggest porn sites because they just don't want to admit to it. And it's sort of part of the secrecy where it's like, look, we need to acknowledge, I think that porn is okay, but there are bad things about how the industry is running right now, and so you sort of need to sort it out. And every player has a responsibility for play. But yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Hello. Oh, wow. Hello. Hot Money was one of the best podcasts last year, in my opinion. And there's one thing that you've not mentioned, and it relates to the podcast. You reveal Visa and MasterCard as the people behind them, the purveyors of what is enabling all this traffic. And you've also revealed that they have a do and don't lists. Was there any... how did they react to that reveal?
Yeah, good question. So I didn't mention that here, but a big chunk of this investigation I did was realizing that Visa and MasterCard are essentially the de facto regulators of the online porn industry in many ways. And they've created this like complicated ecosystem of payment processors who in turn are who actually have lists of what can and cannot be done and said in porn, and they're sort of like regulating the porn industry in that way, but mainly the pay sites and not the free sites that don't rely on payment cards to the same extent. But the question here, what did Visa and MasterCard think about that? So they were not happy. I mean, they don't want to acknowledge that the role that they play, because Visa is being sued now alongside MindGeek for they're being sued for having monetized an illegal video that was found on one of MindGeek's sites. And this is a huge issue for Visa because their entire business model hinges on sort of like the tube sites, being available everywhere. You need to have Visa card because you can use your Visa card everywhere. And if they start saying you can't use it here, you can't use it there, then they become de facto regulators, which they already sort of are in the porn industry, but they don't want to acknowledge it. Do we have time for one more question, maybe here?
Are you being threatened?
No. No. I think the people that were most unhappy with the investigation we did were probably Visa and MasterCard. Okay. I think that's it then.
Thank you very much, Patricia Nilsson.